Tilawat from the Holy Quran, and I see Hafiz Saab here, so I invite him to please come over and do the tilawah for us. Jazakallah. Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. صدق الله العظيم.
Jazakallah khair, Hafiz Saab. Surah Duha, I'll translate that for you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. By the morning brightness and by the night when it covers the darkness, your Lord, the Prophet, has not forsaken you, nor has he detested you. And hereafter is better for you than the first. It's translated like that, but it could also be that the coming time is going to be better for you than the present time you find yourself in. And your Lord is going to give you something that you will be satisfied with. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to say, did we not find you an orphan, and we gave you refuge, and we found you lost and we guided you, and we found you poor and made you self-sufficient. So therefore, Prophet ﷺ, as for the orphan, do not oppress him. As for the petitioner, do not repel him. And as for the favor of your Lord, report it. Subhanallah. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this wonderful seminar that we have arranged for you. And it's also my great pleasure to introduce to you our speaker of the night who's going to take you through this, and that's Dr.Leondard Sax. And by way of introduction, Dr. Sax is an American psychologist and a practicing family physician. So therefore you see MD and, okay, they've removed it. MD and PhD, so mashallah. He resides in Chester County, Pennsylvania. He is best known as the author of 3 books for parents. So for all you parents, these books incidentally are available outside, so you could probably purchase them if you like. And the title of the books are Boys Adrift and then Girls on the Edge. Interesting titles. And Why Gender Matters. Dr. Sax graduated from the Massachusetts Technology, MIT as we call it, in 1980 with a bachelor's degree in biology. He completed the combined MD PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania in 1986. His PhD is in psychology, as you would have guessed. He completed the 3-year residency program in family practice at Lancaster General Hospital back in 1989. Dr. Sax has been featured in the media at numerous occasions in many of the English-speaking countries. And of course, as you can imagine, he has been interviewed by CNN, Times, The Daily Show, The Daily Mail in the UK, etc. And as for the print media, the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, all the prestigious, great newspapers of our time. Dr. Sax has been interviewed and published in those newspapers and has covered many articles and books. So without further ado, it's my pleasure once again to present to you Dr. Leondard Sax.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and I also want to thank Jasmine Hasney and everyone with the Islamic Association of Greater Detroit and Muslim Family Services for giving me this opportunity to return. I spoke here in this facility 3 years ago. And that was just before my fourth book was published, The Collapse of Parenting. The original title of that book was The Collapse of American Parenting. And the subtitle was Why Most Kids Would Not Be Better Off Raised Outside the United States. But non-celebrity authors don't get to choose their titles. So I prepared a handout for you. We're going to cover a great deal of material over the next 2.5 hours. The handout is online now. You don't need it now. That's not the correct link, which means this is not the correct presentation. Hang on just a moment. All right, sorry about that. Anyhow, the handout is online now. You don't need it now. And I would encourage you not to pull it up now. It's many pages. And it is basically an annotated bibliography as well as all the main points from the talk. The point of the handout is to save you the trouble of taking notes. I'll show you this link again. Again, the link is my name, leondardsax.com/MFS for Muslim Family Services .pdf. You will need to include the www and the .pdf. And I'll show you this link again. But I mention it now only so that you know that you don't need to take a lot of notes. The notes are in the handout. Thank you. So I want to start with a quiz. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to indicate your answer to this question. This question is based on a longitudinal cohort study, meaning a study in which researchers recruited kids early in life, followed them throughout childhood, throughout adolescence, and into adulthood, right through 32 years of age. When each child was 12 years old, the researchers interviewed each child to create for each child a validated measure of this child's openness to new ideas, grade point average in IQ, emotional stability, friendliness and agreeableness, and self-control. And then they followed each one of these kids for another 20 years. So this kid's not 12 years old anymore, he's 32 years old. This individual is now a young adult. And at 32 years of age, you track this individual down and you determine for this individual health, wealth, and happiness. Not only by interviewing them, but they also share with you their records and you interview their neighbors. So you really get a valid measure of health and wealth and happiness for each of these individuals, 32 years of age. One of the 5 parameters shown here powerfully predicts, one of these 5 parameters measured when the kid is 12 years old, powerfully and accurately predicts health and wealth and happiness 20 years later. But only one of these 5. The other 4 predict one or none of the 3 principal outcomes. The 3 principal outcomes being health and wealth and happiness. I'd like to see a show of hands. Who thinks that one key parameter that predicts health and wealth and happiness Raise your hand if you think it is openness to new ideas. Okay, don't look at your neighbor, they have no idea. Okay, raise your hand if you think it is a combined measure of grade point average and IQ. Raise your hand if you think it is emotional stability. Raise your hand if you think it is friendliness and agreeableness. Raise your hand if you think it is self-control. All right, I'm going to keep you in suspense. If you leave early, you won't get the answer. But if you stick it out for another 2 hours or so, you will get the answer, and I hope you will get more aside. Speaking to you as a parent, I hope that you will get some strategies that you can use in your home to improve the odds for your child. So let's go back to 1964, 54 years ago. In that era, researchers found that when people came to the United States from overseas and they didn't speak English at home, that their children were at risk of becoming anxious and depressed. And this was a robust empirical finding. And so a consensus arose among researchers 50-some years ago that when kids arrive in this country from overseas and they don't speak English at home, you should get them speaking English at home. Not as a matter of cultural imperialism, but in the best interest of the child. Because there was good research published in that era showing that if you get the child speaking English at home and get the parents speaking English at home, and help the child to assimilate into American culture, you will improve outcomes for that child. You will decrease the risk of anxiety and depression, among other things. The first line in your handout is a scholarly monograph edited by Dr. Melvin Gordon and published by the Oxford University Press in 1964, bringing this research together. Now, I hasten to the disclaimer. I'm not suggesting that 50 years ago were the good old days. They were not. The United States was much more racist and sexist in that era. There are no good old days. Every era has its challenges. But I do think we can learn from the past. And as a matter of empirical fact, 54 years ago, becoming American, speaking English at home, improved outcomes for children. That was true then. It is not true today. In fact, the reverse is now true. To understand what scholars mean by the immigrant paradox, it's helpful to imagine two families living in adjacent homes, right here. And the two households are very similar. They both consist of a mother, a father, a son, a teenage son, and a teenage daughter. The ages are the same in both households. The household income is the same. The occupations of the parents are the same. The main difference between the two homes is that in one home, a mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in the United States, and they speak English at home. In the adjacent home, mother, father, son, and daughter were born and raised in Bangalore, India, and they do not speak English at home. They speak Gujarati in the home, and they've just arrived here in the United States. Now, in which home are we more likely to find that the teenage girl is binge drinking, or cutting herself with razor blades, or has been diagnosed with an eating disorder, or has been diagnosed with anxiety or depression? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the American girl has those problems compared to the girl who just arrived here from India. In which home are we more likely to find that the boy says school is a stupid waste of time, or has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, or has been arrested for street racing? On each of those parameters, it is many times more likely that the boy born and raised in the United States has those problems compared to the boy who just arrived from India. So I am a medical doctor, I'm a practicing physician. When a doctor uses the phrase dose-response effect with regard to a toxin, What we mean is that the more you are exposed to the toxin, the more likely you are to experience an adverse outcome. That boy, that girl who just arrived here from India, the first week they're here, the first month they're here, they're very unlikely to have any of these problems. But if they stay here, and especially if they start speaking English at home, their risk will rise. And if they start speaking English at home, after a few years, the risk of that boy and girl who just arrived from India, after 3, 4, 5 years, it will approach the risk of the boy and girl who've lived here in the United States. These findings lead researchers to conclude that American popular culture is now toxic to children and teenagers. I'm not using the word toxic in a derogatory sense, but merely in a descriptive sense. Meaning the more a child or teenager is exposed to American culture, the more likely they are to experience an adverse outcome, like anxiety, depression, disengagement from school, etc. It's not a pejorative statement, it's an empirical finding. And this yields, and I should mention that when scholars first began to document this about 17 years ago, they were surprised, because many of these scholars earned their doctorates in the 80s and 90s and had been raised on the earlier data from the 60s and 70s showing that becoming American improved outcomes, that learning to speak English at home improved outcomes. So they were startled when they found that's no longer true, the reverse is true. They were so startled they coined the phrase the immigrant paradox, because it seemed paradoxical to them that the children of immigrants to the United States now do better than the children of parents born and raised here, as long as the children do not start speaking English at home. Because speaking English at home is a marker that you have assimilated into American culture. So this yields one practical suggestion. If your first language was not English, speak your native language at home. Do not speak English at home. Ensure that your kids are fluent in your native language, and your conversation at home should not be in English. It should be in your native language. Create social events and get-togethers with other families who speak your native language. Create strong ties to others in your community so that your kids can interact with other people who speak your native language, not American English. So when I visited here 3 years ago, I met with a mother and father who were born and raised in Syria. But many years ago they came to the United States, but they speak Arabic at home. And as a rule, their kids speak Arabic at home. But the father told me when his son wants to be disrespectful, he switches to English. The son switches to English. And the father told me it's like Justin Bieber just walked in. His body language changes, he slouches, he becomes defiant. English is now the language of disrespect. If you can, don't speak English at home. Speak a language other than English at home. This is not a guess. We now have good research showing that if kids start speaking English at home, that's now a risk factor. That assimilating into American culture is now problematic. Why? Why is becoming American now a major risk factor for anxiety, depression, drug and alcohol use, disengagement from school, and many other bad outcomes? That was not true 40 years ago. It is true today. And what can we do about it? To get a handle on that question and to answer it, as I will try to do this evening, I think it's helpful to talk to comparative anthropologists. That means people who have spent their professional lives studying how other people have lived in other times and other places. As I did in writing my book, Boys Adrift. Talked to professionals like Gilbert Hurt, and especially David Gilmore at the State University of New York at Stony Brook. And I said to Dr. Gilmore, I said, talk to me about cultures that last. Cultures that have been around for thousands of years. Do they have anything in common? Say in terms of how they dress, or what they eat, or what they're not allowed to eat, or what their religious beliefs are. Let's consider the Navajo, the native people of the southwestern United States, and let's contrast them with Orthodox Jews. We know a lot about both these cultures. They've been around for thousands of years. They're still with us. And on the parameters I just mentioned, what they eat, what they drink, what their religious beliefs are, they have nothing in common. That's why I mentioned them, because they're so different. But there's one thing they share. One thing that the scholars tell us all enduring cultures share. And that is strong bonds of respect across generations. So that's a photograph of Kenneldon. Now, if you know only a little about the Navajo, and someone says, well, what's Kenneldon? Then say, well, it's a rite of passage. When a Navajo girl has her first menstrual period, she stays in the home of her grandmother for 4 days and 4 nights. And during those 4 days and nights, all of her adult female relatives call on her, and she demonstrates to them that she has indeed mastered the arts and crafts of Kenneldon. The arts and crafts that are taught by Navajo women to Navajo girls, and only to girls, and not to boys. And that's true enough as far as it goes, but it's more than a rite of passage. It's a process that's been going on usually for 2, 3, 4 years by the time this girl actually gets her menstrual period. And incidentally, it's not primarily about mother-daughter. Mom plays little role. It's the grandmothers and the women of the grandmother's generation who take the lead. And that's a common, though not universal feature among enduring cultures, that the grandparents and the grandparents' generation takes a leading role. You have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. So, you may have heard of bar mitzvah, a rite of passage for a Jewish boy when he turns 13. But in an Orthodox Jewish community, every aspect of religious life is single sex. Though women and girls worship here, there's a barrier, men and boys worship here. That's not that boy's father. It's another man in the synagogue teaching that boy, this is what it means to be a Jewish man. This woman is teaching this girl, this is what it means to be a Jewish woman. Now what that girl is learning is completely different from what the Navajo girl is learning. There's almost no overlap in the content, but the process is the same. In every enduring culture, in every culture that lasts, you have a community of women for girls and a community of men for boys. I'm not talking about teaching math, science, language, arts, or social studies. Women can teach that stuff to boys, men can teach that stuff to girls. I'm talking about the answer to the question, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a woman? That is taught to girls by women and to boys by men. Strong bonds across generations, a community of women for girls, a community of men for boys. This is a robust feature of every culture that lasts, so the anthropologists teach us. And it used to be true of American culture. And by American culture, I mean secular English-speaking American culture. And this is not a guess. Again, we have scholars like Robert Putnam at Harvard who spent the last 20 years leading an army of graduate students across the United States, documenting more than 200,000 structured interviews, conducting more than 200,000 structured interviews, documenting that 50 years ago, you could go into any neighborhood in the United States and you would find a sewing circle. So he goes to Grosse Pointe, Michigan 50 years ago and finds, okay, 1964, they had a sewing circle, women and girls on this block, organized not by kin relation, but by geographic proximity, which is a fancy way of saying the women and girls in the sewing circle weren't related to one another, they just happened to live on the same block. He documents not only formal but also informal associations. So he shows that 50 years ago you could go to almost any neighborhood in the United States on a Saturday afternoon and you'd find a bunch of guys working under the hood of a car. So summer 1965, Minot, North Dakota, a bunch of guys working under the hood of a car, and he documents who was that bunch of guys. There were older men, younger men, and boys. You drive around a neighborhood in the United States today on a Saturday afternoon, you might see two old geezers working under the hood of their 65 Corvette, but the teenage boys are not with them. The boys are inside playing video games with other boys. The bonds across generations have been broken. Bowling used to be more popular in the United States, but more importantly, from Dr. Putnam's perspective, it was done differently. 50 years ago, most of the bowling that happened in the United States was in bowling leagues. And Tuesday night might be the women's night, and Thursday night was the men's night. And again, he and his students dig up, okay, who was in the bowling league in Lake Forest, Illinois in 1964? Well, let's see, on this particular team, there was a 53-year-old woman, a 37-year-old woman, a 26-year-old woman, a 17-year-old girl, and a 12-year-old girl. Kids in the United States still go bowling, but they go bowling alone. The title of Dr. Putnam's best-known book. Meaning not literally alone, but instead of this 17-year-old girl going bowling with a community of women, she's going bowling with a bunch of 17-year-olds, girls and boys mixed together, which as far as Dr. Putnam is concerned is bowling alone. When Dr. Putnam uses the term community, he means bonds across generations. And the bonds across generations, which were once strong in the United States, have now been broken. So that's one big change in mainstream American English-speaking culture over the last 50 years, the breaking of bonds across generations. Another change we learn about from the work of James Coleman, sociologist at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, but who also led teams of graduate students across the United States interviewing American teenagers. And one of the questions he would like to ask, he would ask American teenagers, if all of your friends wanted you to join a particular club, but one of your parents did not approve, would you still join? And 50 years ago, most American teens told Dr. Coleman, no, they would not join. Because the opinion of their parents mattered more than the combined opinion of all their friends. Beginning in 2007, I asked teenagers an updated version of Dr. Coleman's question. Across Michigan and across the United States, I asked teenagers, if all your friends wanted you to sign up for a particular social media page, would you consult your parents first? And the most common answer I get from American kids is not yes, it's not no, it's laughter. The kids burst out laughing. One girl said, my parents would probably think Ask FM is some kind of radio station. You know, why would I ask them? Now these kids may say they love their parents, but the opinion of their same age peers matters more. And that's a really big change. Prioritizing of same age peer relations. Why does it matter? It matters because cultures that last are characterized by strong attachments across generations. And kids are looking to the grown-ups. But American kids who speak English at home are now looking to the marketplace, and their primary attachment is to their peers. They care more about what their peers think than what their parents think. This is not a guess. Again, this is a robust empirical finding of kids in this country who speak English at home. Why does it matter? It matters because good parents offer unconditional attachment and affection, but peers don't. Good parents nurture, but peers can't. Good parents sacrifice for their kids, but peers rarely do so for same-age friends. That's my daughter. She's 11 years old. In that picture, she is pretending to do an ad for maraschino cherries at our local grocery store. Let's suppose she were to say to me, "I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again." Well, there would be consequences. Her mother and I would discuss and decide what privileges she would lose and for how long as a result of that outburst. But nothing fundamental would change. She would not lose her place in our home. We wouldn't stop loving her. There's nothing that she could do or say that would cause us to stop loving her. But suppose she says those same words to a friend at school. "I hate you. I never want to talk to you ever again." Well, that friendship is over, or it is at least badly damaged. Peer relations are contingent and ephemeral, and every kid knows it. If the primary attachment, if a child's primary attachment is to their parents, then they can relax, because they know that no matter what, that will not change. The most important relationship in their life will not change. But if the most important relationship in their life is not with their parents, but with their same-age peers, then everything becomes unstable. And so many American parents don't get this. One mother was saying to me, she was boasting about how independent her 12-year-old daughter was. She said that she and her husband had proposed a 3-day ski weekend, and their 12-year-old daughter said, "Oh, no, you guys go, you go away. I'll stay over at Madison's house. You know, her parents are fine with that. I'm not really much for skiing." And Mom was telling me this, very proud that her 12-year-old daughter was so independent. She's not independent. She's merely transferred her dependence from her parents to her same-age peers. She would rather spend her free time with her same-age peers than with her parents. That's not a good thing. It's not a good thing because peer relations are contingent and ephemeral, which is a fancy way of saying they can change overnight. You can go from being the most popular girl to being the odd girl out in one day, in 5 minutes. You want to see an American girl have a total meltdown? Take her phone from her without warning, and she will totally freak out. She'll be like, "But Sonia doesn't know I don't have my phone. What if she texts me and I don't answer? She might think I'm ignoring her. She might think I don't like her." And as I said, you can go from being the most popular girl to being the odd girl out in 5 minutes. And so you got all these American girls glued to their phones. It's now very common in the United States. So that's the second big change. The prioritizing of same-age peer relations over parent-child relations. Well documented and immensely harmful. A third big change in American culture over the last 50 years, really over the last 20 years. Again, the anthropologists teach us that most, indeed all, enduring cultures are characterized by strong bonds of respect across generations. And that was true of mainstream American culture 50 years ago. Even if the parents were lousy parents who never said a word about it, didn't matter. If the kid, 50 years ago, if the kids spoke English at home and watched American television and American movies, they were immersed in a culture that did teach it. The most popular television shows of 50 years ago, shows like Father Knows Best, shown here, My Three Sons, The Andy Griffith Show. The parents portrayed in those shows were consistently knowledgeable, competent, caring, thoughtful, productive, reliable, and kind. That's not true of American culture today. In writing my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I reviewed the 150 most popular television shows in the United States today. Not one of them consistently or even often portrays a parent as knowledgeable, competent, reliable, productive. The longest running television comedy in the United States on American television is The Simpsons. Homer Simpson is a bum. His wife varies. Sometimes she's wise, more often she is not. The wisest of the major characters of the show is the daughter, Lisa, who's consistently more insightful than her parents. But I'm not picking on the show. I do not see this show as a cause. I see it as a symptom. I actually think the writers for the show have real insight into what's happened. In one episode, you get to see inside Homer Simpson's brain. Homer Simpson's brain has 3 major drives: sleep, donuts, and beer. I think there's real insight there. If you imagine an American show about an American cartoon about an American man 50 years ago, it probably would have depicted the entire brain as a sex drive. That was the stereotype of American men 50 years ago, that they were only interested in the sex. Not anymore. Now it's about sleep, donuts, and beer. The testosterone levels of American men have fallen by half over the past 60 years. Urologists report prescribing more Viagra for men under 30 than for men over 40. So I think there's some real insight there. Modern Family, shown here, the straight dad is consistently a buffoon whose idiotic, stupid behavior is the joke. We laugh at him. His children are consistently wiser, more insightful, or usually wiser, more insightful than he is. The Disney Channel, if you don't watch the Disney Channel, you might think, oh, Disney, that's family friendly, right? No, it's not. The television shows on the Disney Channel consistently portray parents as clueless and out of touch. This show, Dog with a Blog, the father, supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about what kids want or what kids need. The talking dog is more insightful than the idiot dad. And again, we laugh at Dad for his stupid, clueless behavior. Liv and Maddie, shown here, the 2 girls are as different as they can be. The one thing they agree on is that their mother, also supposedly a school psychologist, knows nothing about the actual behavior or motivation of children. The 2 girls are much wiser than their mother. And again, we are expected to laugh at Mom as the girls roll their eyes. Well, girls and boys are not born knowing what it means to be ladies and gentlemen. They have to be taught. It's true in every culture. But we no longer teach them, and so they look to the marketplace, and the marketplace has changed. That's Sam Cooke. 50 years ago, Sam Cooke had a #1 hit song. He sang, "Don't Know Much About History." He sang, "Now I don't claim to be an A student, but I'm trying to be. Because maybe by being an A student, baby, I could win your love for me." He goes on to mention French, geometry, and trigonometry, a subject in which he's going to try harder to earn an A rather than a B. 50 years ago, the culture of people who spoke English at home was the culture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Simon and Garfunkel. Not anymore. Today, American popular culture, as it is experienced by kids who speak English at home, is the culture of Detroit's own Eminem, Nicki Minaj, Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, Akon. So looking around this room, I see some old people. By old people, I mean people over 40. I find that people over 40 don't know who Akon is, so let me tell you. Akon is a singer very popular with American kids, white and black. He chose the name Akon to remind you of his claim. He claims to be Akon. He claims to be a convicted felon. He claims to have served 2 years for Grand Theft Auto in the Georgia State Penitentiary, a claim which turns out to be false. When he got to be famous, the reporters looked it up and they found that, well, he was arrested on a charge of possession of 1 item of stolen property, but those charges were quickly dismissed. He's never been convicted of anything, and he's never been in jail except to perform. Bruno Mars, his album 24. January 28th, less than 3 months ago, Bruno Mars was awarded 6 Grammys, more than any other artist. Reporters called it the coronation of Bruno Mars. Several for his song and all for the album that song came off of. There he is holding up his Grammy for Best Song at the Grammys. Well, let's look at this Best Song. Let's look at some of the lyrics. I got a condo in Manhattan. You and your blank invited. Turn around and drop it for a player. He is offering money for sex to a woman he doesn't know. And this is the best song of the year, in the opinion of the Recording Academy. That's the YouTube video, which has had over 1 billion views, over 1 billion with a B. Offers money, diamonds, shopping spree in Paris in return for sex. Sex is portrayed as a transaction. I'll give you this if you give me that. There's no mention of love or relationship, just an escalating bribe. The word there is money, M-O-N-E-Y. Money makes her smile, not love or courtesy or respect. Money makes her smile. And this is the best song of the year. That is now characteristic of American popular culture. So another take-home message is you need to know which songs your kids are listening to. When I watch parents pick up their kids at school, kid climbs in the car and puts an earbud. No earbuds. You need to know what songs your kid is listening to. They should not be listening to Bruno Mars, or Akon, or Eminem, or 50 Cent, because these songs influence kids. And we've got very good research on this point. The kind of music kids listen to and the lyrics in the music influence their beliefs. Kids are not born knowing what's right and wrong. They have to be taught. And these songs are teaching them. They're teaching them something you don't want your kids to learn. They're teaching them that sex is a commodity that girls sell to boys. That is characteristic of American popular culture today. Certainly was not true of American culture even 20 years ago. But it's very unhealthy. So the first chapter of my book, The Collapse of Parenting. The first chapter is titled The Culture of Disrespect. By the culture of disrespect, I don't mean only that American popular culture now teaches kids to be disrespectful to adults, although it does. I mean also that it teaches them to be disrespectful to one another. And I present numerous lines of evidence to support that claim, but just one very quickly is t-shirts. It's common to find American kids wearing t-shirts that say things like, "Do I look like I care? I'm out of your league. You look better on Facebook. You look like I need another drink. I don't need you, I have Wi-Fi. I'm not shy, I just don't like you." So I met with kids in Scotland, in Edinburgh, in Perthshire, in Stirling, and I showed them these t-shirts, and the kids in Scotland were baffled. Why would you go out into public wearing a t-shirt that says to the whole world, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you"? To the kids in Scotland, that didn't seem funny, it seems rude, almost nonsensical. But American kids who speak English at home, who have marinated in this culture of disrespect, they find this sort of thing funny. This is a uniquely American phenomenon. You do not find kids wearing these t-shirts outside of North America. I was actually in Sydney, Australia, and I saw a teenager wearing Same words, different t-shirt, but the t-shirt said, "I'm not shy, I just don't like you." And I went up to him, turned out he was an American kid on vacation. This is a uniquely American phenomenon. So far we've looked at, the question we're trying to address here is, why is becoming American now so toxic? Why should you not speak English at home? In answering that question, we have considered 3 well-documented and fundamental changes in American culture over the last 50 years. One is the breaking of bounds across generation. Another is the prioritizing of same-age peer relations over the relation between the parent and child. Friends, same-age friends matter more than parents to American kids. And the culture of disrespect. Those are 3 big changes, but we are not finished. These are all listed in your handout. What do kids need? Let's go back 438 years. A French aristocrat named Michel de Montaigne wrote a letter to his friend, a woman, an aristocrat, Lady Diana de Foix, who had a young son, and he advised her to raise your son roughly and dangerously on a fractious horse against a tough opponent, sword in hand, harden him to sweltering heat and the cold, to wind and sun, and to such dangers as he must learn to treat with contempt. He should experience hunger and exhaustion and loneliness. There is no other prescription. We tend to smile when we read that because we know better, don't we? Science has proven that trauma in childhood increases the risk of bad outcomes in adulthood, hasn't it? What is the evidence? What should we be doing? What does a young person need? The contemporary American consensus, indeed, is that trauma in childhood, whether physical or mental, increases the likelihood of bad outcomes in adulthood. But what does the research actually show? So more than 100 years ago, Robert Yerkes, who was then a professor of psychology at Harvard, and one of his graduate students, John Dodson, conducted the first scholarly investigation of the relation between stress and performance. And they found if there's no stress, there's not much performance. Moderate stress yields optimal performance. Too much stress, and you don't get good performance. This relationship, variously called the Yerkes-Dodson curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law, the Yerkes-Dodson relationship, is arguably the most validated empirical finding in human psychology. It has been shown to be true in sports at every level, from kindergarten through professional sports. It is true in commercial sales, it is true in military combat, it is true in academic test taking, and many other domains. And that's basically what it looks like. And this graph is in your handout. Nothing at stake, nothing matters, not much performance. Too much at stake, someone's holding a gun to your head. If you don't do it perfectly, you're not going to do well. The sweet spot is in the middle, where there's something at stake. There's a possibility of losing, and losing matters. But you're not going to die. Many parents today act as if it's our job as parents to protect our kids from all stress, all trauma, all disappointment. And the result is not stronger kids, but weaker kids. The shape of the curve does vary as a function of age and sex. Certainly young kids need gentler treatment than teenagers. When your child is a toddler, you are more like a cheerleader. And when they take their first steps, it's like, way to go, great job. But as your child grows up, your role must change. And you become less cheerleader and more coach. Or you should make that change. The coach praises the good behavior but corrects the bad behavior. But many, many American parents who speak English at home Now adopt the cheerleader approach all the way through. Great job. Great job. Well done. So the big news here, the big exciting insight, is that the 14-year-old is not an infant. The 14-year-old must be corrected, must experience some hardship, some real disappointment, must fail, but not too much. You don't want to go off to the other side of the Yerkes-Dodson. Parenting is an art. It's not a science. It can be informed by science, and I think should be. Just as the practice of medicine is an art. It is informed by science. But it is an art because how you treat this patient may be different from how you treat that patient. And it's part of the art of parenting to know what correction is the right amount for your child. So today, American parents are much more careful to protect their kids from trauma of every kind than they were in comparison with American parents 30 years ago. So compared with the experience of 30, 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, are young American kids today less likely to be depressed, anxious, disengaged? No, they're much more likely to be depressed, anxious, and disengaged compared to young people from the same demographic. So a girl came home from school. She was upset. She told her mother that all the other girls in the grade had been invited to a big party, a party that all the kids had been talking about for a long time. And she had assumed that all the kids would be invited, but then she discovered that she was not invited. All the other girls in the grade were, she thought, but she wasn't. So the parent called the mother of the birthday girl and said, was there a mistake? My daughter wasn't invited. And my daughter says all the other girls were invited. Well, the mother of the birthday girl corrected this mom and explained, no, all the other girls were not invited. There are 17 girls in the grade, 17. 10 were invited and 7 were not. So, I attended a talk by Donna Linder, who is head of the lower school at the school my daughter attends, Agnes Irwin School, AIS. And Donna taught us something I think that was very wise. She said, when your child comes home from school and she's upset about something that happened at school that day, she's looking to you for some guidance. Is this a big deal or not? So in the previous example, your daughter comes home from school and says that she believes all the other girls were invited, but she was not invited. What is best practice? What should you do in such a situation? I submit that best practice in that situation would be to say something like, okay, so a week from Saturday, you thought you were going to the party, now you know you're not. You know that new bike trail that just opened? You and me, we're going on the bike trail a week from Saturday. Write it on the calendar. You're sending the message, whether or not you're invited to that party is not the most important thing in the world. The relationship you and I have, that's really important. Walk it off. And yet, in my experience as a practicing physician and psychologist, it would be very unusual today to find an American parent who would say such a thing. On the contrary, American parents who speak English at home are much more likely when their daughter comes home and says, all the other girls were invited, but I wasn't invited. The typical American parent will now say, oh, honey, that's terrible. You must feel so awful. And now you both burst into tears. You are teaching her that whether or not you get invited to a party is a really big deal. And if you're not invited, it's good grounds for crying. You are teaching her to be fragile. You're teaching her to care immensely what other kids her age think. It's really harmful. And yet it's become very common. So, I visited Shore, a boys' school in Sydney, Australia. The previous headmaster, Robert Grant, would typically bring parents of new students into his office, and he was very fond of saying to the new parents, he would say to them, "I do hope your son will be profoundly disappointed during his time at this school." And the parents were baffled. "Why do you hope my son will be profoundly disappointed?" And he would explain, "Look, if your son does not experience disappointment at school, trying really hard to get a good mark and failing, then he will be unprepared for disappointment in life when it comes, and it will surely come." So what sort of experience gives kids the right kind of challenge? Puts you in that sweet spot on the Yerkes-Dodson curve without actually being dangerous. You don't want your kid to be in danger. Well, let me give you one example. The summer job. It is now common among middle-income and affluent parents in the United States that they want their teenage son or daughter to do an internship, a prestigious internship, or a selective academic program to boost their grades, boost their test scores, and certainly not to wait tables at a diner for a low wage, even though the parent themselves, 20 or 30 years ago, might have had just such a job. Today, they don't want that for their child. They want their child to do something much more prestigious. But I think the parents are mistaken, because working that low-wage summer job at that restaurant could be just the right kind of experience. Because the manager doesn't care about her feelings. And because the rude customer who's complaining about the coffee being cold doesn't care about her feelings. That's the right kind of experience. Excuse me. Because your daughter will learn, I can survive that. It will not break me. That's how you develop strength. Dealing with that demanding boss and the crabby customer is how you develop resilience. This is what the researchers find. You need those kinds of experiences, which you are unlikely to get as an intern at Morgan Stanley. Without those experiences, small problems can come to seem overwhelming. To do the right thing as a parent in the United States requires that you be courageous. And when you're talking with your neighbor, and where your one neighbor boasts about how her son has been accepted for the prestigious internship at Goldman Sachs, and your other neighbor boasts about how her daughter has been accepted to the highly selective, intensive summer academic program at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and then they look at you and you say, well, my daughter's working at a greasy spoon in Traverse City for low wage and tips. That requires courage. So, after I did a version of this talk last year, I met with a man, now a middle-aged man, who told me he wasn't a very good student in high school, goofed off a lot. Then he got a summer job working in the oil fields of West Texas for Halliburton. And he said it was really, really difficult, demanding, backbreaking, physical work, waking up early in the morning, working till late at night, and the older men were yelling at him and laughing at him. But he discovered he could do it. And he said he learned so much that summer about character, about perseverance. He said it changed me for the better. And he now is a managing director at Goldman Sachs. Very successful by any measure. He's got a strong marriage. loving children, earning a lot of money. He also credits his father and his grandfather. In the English language, there are two words that are the opposite of fragile. The problem with the word resilient is that it's become almost meaningless. In American usage today, resilient means anything that the speaker likes. Resilient is ambiguous. It can mean two very different things. It can mean robust or it can mean adaptive. Robust means you fail and you try the same thing. You fail again and you try the same thing. And you fail again and you try the same thing. But adaptive means that you fail and you try something different. The two antonyms of fragile, the opposite of fragile, could be either robust or adaptive or anti-fragile. Anti-fragile means, as I said, you try something, you fail, and so you try something different. And maybe you fail again. Success means moving from one failure to the next with no loss of enthusiasm. Nassim Taleb says that's the secret to true success. Now, Nassim Taleb is writing from the perspective of a bond trader. He's talking about being successful in investing. But I think his argument applies with at least equal force to parenting and to raising kids who are not fragile in a culture where American kids are increasingly fragile. Failure is not a tragedy. Failure is more often the key to success, or more precisely, the willingness to fail is the key to success. And again, American parents are so confused on this regard. Look, to get admitted to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, Stanford, yeah, you do have to have really good grades. So a grade of C in one course, and your life is ruined. And I see this. This high school girl is sobbing. And mom goes in and thinks, what happened? Was she assaulted? And well, she got a C on her physics exam. And she thinks her life is over. You find American kids piling up all these extracurricular activities because they think that's what the colleges want. And a parent says to me, I'm not pushing her to do this, she's pushing herself. Yeah, well, you need to understand why is she signing up for all these things. Okay, so what's going on with soccer? Does she really love soccer, or does she think that she needs to do soccer in order to have a more impressive application? American culture now inculcates fear of failure. Never refer to your daughter as a straight-A student. Never, ever use that phrase. Because if your daughter hears you refer to her as a straight-A student, that's immensely dangerous, because then getting a B is a catastrophe. She's no longer a straight-A student, and she is becoming more fragile every semester that she gets straight A's. Every time she hears you boast to friends that she is a straight-A student, only increases the magnitude and consequences of the collapse when it comes, and it will surely come. As one high school football coach said to me, he said, there are two kinds of football players: those who are humble and those who soon will be. Anti-fragility means transforming fear into prudence, pain into information, mistakes into initiation, and desire into undertaking. Again, that's quoting from Nassim Taleb's book. That's in your handout. We're going to have a break for prayer in just a minute. Any comment, question, disagreement about anything I've said so far? All right. This is a good, go ahead, yes.
Yeah, you may get to this in the other part of the presentation. My question is, when you're presenting the connections that people had in the 60s and before that, I think a lot of it, I mean, the kids, they basically didn't have a choice in those situations, in those times. I think if you gave them the choice, would it be fair to say that they would choose to be with a peer group? Because what I'm looking at now is when you put a smartphone in their hand, they have that option. If you put a smartphone in the hands of a kid in the 60s, they stop working on the car and they'd be talking to their friends. And so I guess, I don't really see how that connection can be reestablished unless you invent that means of isolating themselves.
So your colleague says, I don't see how the connection can be reestablished. The connection can be reestablished. Your colleague points out that the smartphone is often driving the breaking of bonds. He's right. That means you take the smartphone away. The smartphone prioritizes same-age peer relations. What are kids doing on their smartphone? They're talking to other kids. And they're following on Instagram people like Justin Bieber, Miley Cyrus, the vectors of American culture. You must limit, govern, and guide your kids' use of the smartphone. And we're going to talk a lot more about that after the break. So I do think I'll answer that in more detail after the break. Yes, sir.
You said that you got to know as a year old to 32-year-old.
The longitudinal cohort study.
Yes. Was there significant 12-year start at that?
They didn't start at 12. They actually recruited those kids in infancy. But periodically throughout life, they would meet with the kids at 9 years of age, 12 years of age, 14 years of age, and conduct these structured interviews to track kids on their trajectory. But no, the study actually began when the kids were infants. But at 9, 12, and 14 years of age, they conducted those structured interviews. And we're going to talk more about that study later. Yes?
I want to know what is your opinion, because I think you mentioned that these are the English-speaking homes. What is your opinion about people who don't speak English and also around the world? Because I think these things affect everybody around. It's not just English-speaking homes.
Right. So your colleague is saying, oh, come on, this is not really confined to the United States. And as I mentioned, the publisher changed the title of the book from The Collapse of American Parenting to The Collapse of Parenting, because some elements of this are indeed international. And the confusion and uncertainty about parents' role is certainly international. But there are some features of this, which I'm emphasizing this evening, that are uniquely American. The culture of disrespect is characteristically American. It is much less common outside of North America. As I said, you don't find kids wearing t-shirts that say, I'm not shy, I just don't like you, outside of North America. And of course you'll find Akon, Eminem, Justin Bieber, Bruno Mars outside of North America, but outside of North America they're recognized as American cultural imports. And kids there are free to reject them if they want to. If you're born and raised in the United States and you speak English at home, this is your culture. It's the water you swim in. And it's much harder to reject it because it's your home culture. The use of medication as a first resort is uniquely American. An American kid is 14 times more likely to be on medication for ADD compared to a kid in the United Kingdom. An American kid is 93 times more likely to be on medications like Risperdal, Zyprexa, Seroquel compared to a kid in Italy. The use of medication as a first resort for any kid who's having any kind of problem is uniquely American. So there are some features of this that are more of a problem in this country than elsewhere. But other aspects that I think you're alluding to, and especially the confusion of parents about their authority and the transfer of authority. Look, the first great sociologist to point this out was Norbert Elias, writing about what he was observing in Germany in his paper Über den Veränderungen in europäischen Verhaltensstandards im 20. Jahrhundert, which means regarding changes in European civilization in the second half of the 20th century. He said the biggest change has been the transfer of authority from parents to children. That parents now let kids decide what's for supper or how they're going to spend their free time. And he was talking about the European continent, where English is not the primary language. So we need to take a break, and we'll come back after.